Hey everybody, I'm back after the Thanksgiving break. Haven't done anything in a while, but we're going to talk about teams not in the playoffs right now. And every year there's always a big deal made around Thanksgiving, and because teams, with the exception of usually 3 or 4, teams that are in the playoffs at Thanksgiving are the teams that make the playoffs, and it's really difficult if you're out of the playoffs at Thanksgiving time to work your way in. So today we're going to look at teams that are surprising teams that are outside of the playoffs right now. So there's a good chance that they don't get in. And so first up, the New York Rangers. The Rangers got off to a horrible start, but they've been much better lately. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. They're on a 4-game win streak, and they're only 1 point out of a playoff spot. But they are currently out of the playoffs, and I think going into the season, a lot of people expected the Rangers to be one of the best teams in the East and compete for the Metropolitan Division, and that has not happened, mostly because of their awful start. So of all the teams that are surprisingly not in the playoffs, I think the Rangers have the best chance of making the playoffs. I think they absolutely end up getting in. Next, Montreal, another team that got off to a horrible start. They still haven't been great. They're 2 points out of a playoff spot right now, but everybody has games in hand on them for the most part. So Montreal is still in trouble, and I don't think they make it this year. Ottawa was in the playoffs for most of this season, but they've really stumbled the last couple weeks. They've lost 4 in a row, and now all of a sudden they're 3 points out of a playoff spot. They went to the conference final last year, and they're in danger of not even making the playoffs this year. The way the East is working out, the Metro is so much better than the Atlantic. It's almost a guarantee that 5 teams from the Metro are going to make it, and only 3 from the Atlantic. So that means the fight for that third spot in the Atlantic Division is going to be huge, and that's going to be for the last playoff spot. And you've got a lot of teams going for that. Boston, Montreal, Ottawa, Detroit, who's in it right now, which is the opposite of this surprising team that's in the playoffs. Detroit's certainly one of them. But yeah, that's going to be an absolute dogfight for that last spot, that third spot in the Atlantic Division, and that's going to be the last playoff spot. So Ottawa's out right now after making the playoffs and going all the way to the conference final last year. So those are the big 3 surprises in the East. The other teams that are currently out, I don't think it's a huge surprise that they're out. So moving over to the West, Dallas. Dallas supposedly won the offseason. They were going to, return to the team that they were 2 years ago. They were going to, win the Central Division. Well, they're sitting 1 point out of a playoff spot right now. They haven't been awful this year, but they've been very inconsistent. And sometimes they look like that first place team that could, make a serious playoff run, and then other nights they look like they did last year, where they were a really bad bottom-feeding team. So Dallas needs to get some consistency. If they can do that, then they should be all right for the playoffs. Minnesota's another team. They're 1 point out of the playoffs. I think a lot of people expected them to make it this year. They made it last year, and they're out right now, and they've played a lot of games, and they're still behind the 8 ball. So I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be really, really tough for Minnesota to make it at this point, but it's not impossible, certainly. Anaheim, they've just been absolutely ravaged by injuries this year, but they're sitting 2 points out of a playoff spot right now. I think Anaheim makes it. I think when they're healthy, they're easily one of the top, 3 or 4 teams in the West. The injuries have just absolutely hampered their season so far, but they start getting guys back. they're going to have a good second half. They're going to make a real push, and I think Anaheim will definitely be one of those teams that's out now but will make the playoffs. And lastly, the biggest disappointment of this season by far, the Edmonton Oilers. They're 6 points out of a playoff spot right now. It's just a disastrous season for the Oilers. It's not impossible for them to make up 6 points, but it's going to be very, very difficult. They're going to have to rip off a real, a long streak with, maybe going like 10-2 over 12-game stretch, and even that, I don't know if that, depending on how the teams in front of them do, that might not even be enough to make up this full gap. This team's in a lot of trouble, and I think the playoffs, as time goes on, they're getting less and less likely, and Edmonton hasn't put that streak together. They've been playing better, and they're still a 500 team. They have not put a streak together, so Edmonton is in big trouble, and I don't see them making the playoffs this year. So those are just some teams that they're sitting outside of the playoffs right now that I think a lot of people, at least most people, had in the playoffs before the season started. So these are just some surprises. So that's just what I think. I think these guys it's pretty surprising that these teams are out. There's also been quite a few positive surprises, teams that are in that a lot of people didn't expect. Teams like New Jersey, Vegas, I don't know how they're doing what they're doing. Winnipeg, even St. Louis for me is a surprise because I had them missing the playoffs this year. Now they're in first place. So Detroit's another one. The Islanders. So these have been the teams that are surprisingly out. They've, for the most part, all been replaced with teams that are surprisingly in. So that's just what I think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow. Thanks again for watching, and talk to you guys soon.